I'm just so happy. We finally we have a game worth talking about. We have finally a game on the primetime recap series worth freaking talking about. And we have one of the biggest trades of this season, especially during the season. CMC goes to San Francisco. This is all we've been asking for here on the primetime recap series. Welcome into the fantasy draft room. I'm so freaking excited to finally have a game that I actually care about talking about. It's been an absolute struggle over the past couple of weeks. I looked at it at halftime. I think we were at 14-28. That score at halftime was higher than every other Thursday night football game except for the Browns and the Steelers in week 3, which was only like 2 points higher throughout the entire game. We finally have scoring to talk about. Now, yes, was that a little bit due to Andy Dalton throwing 2 pick sixes in the last, like 4 minutes of the first half? Yes, it was. But we finally, even without that, we finally got a game worth talking about. Oh my goodness. Let's get into, though, the absolute groundbreaking news just happened right as we were ending this game. CMC gets traded to San Francisco. I know this is a recap show, but we cannot miss the opportunity to talk about this almost live as it's happening. CMC leaving the Panthers for a second, third, fourth, and a fifth in 24. The second, third, and fourths all coming in 23. The Panthers recoup a bunch of draft picks. The rebuild is in full sell mode. They've already fired the head coach. Baker Mayfield, he looks like he's playing with the team that he was putting on the garage sale and the yard sale and the Progressive commercials. It's an absolute dumpster fire over there. Full rebuild. It's going to take a while for them to get back. That team ain't going to be good. Hopefully, DJ Moore can get himself out of there. That has to feel like an absolute horrible contract that he signed, where he basically took less money than everybody else was getting and re-signed to one of the worst teams in football right now. Man, who cares though? CMC in San Francisco is going to be absolutely electric. Jimmy G for the rest of the year. Can this team make a Super Bowl run? Trey Lance, he's going to be the quarterback of the future. Man, so many things to break down from tonight. I'm absolutely excited to be here with you all. Whew, let's all take a moment and regroup ourselves. All right, CMC going to the San Francisco 49ers to run the lead RB role in that offense, going to be absolutely dominant. Wonder where he's going to end up in the dynasty rankings and, like KTC values after this week. It's going to be an absolute rise for him. I know he's probably still top 5 in running backs. Does he bump JT, go into RB2 role behind only Breece Hall? Does he even jump Breece Hall, go into RB1? I think some people can make the argument. I think that's a little bit of overhype, though. He's going to go into a new offense. It's going to take him time to learn the offense. He's probably only going to be in a red zone package for the first week. He's going to slowly build, but he is going to be damn good down the stretch. The only concern that I have is that we've seen in the zone scheme running system that Shanahan employs, running backs are susceptible to injuries, and we've seen that CMC also is susceptible to injuries. I hope for our good graces of just watching pure NFL talent that he can stay healthy. That's my only concern, though, for this year. He's going to be through that team. I think he's locked up through 2025 on the current contract that he has. Man, I am absolutely excited to watch CMC in a 49ers uniform. Going to be a great ride for the rest of the season. Hope he can still stay healthy and produce those RB1 overall numbers that we saw for all of those years whenever he was healthy. In terms of other news, if you are playing in deeper leagues, you're playing in deeper dynasty leagues, there's a couple of guys that you need to look out for on your waiver wires. Deontay Foreman, Chuba Hubbard. And then you also need to look out for Blackshear. Blackshear is the one who will probably take over a lot of the passing work, and he's on a lot of waivers right now. I actually just picked him up in 2 leagues right before we went live here. Pick him up if you're in those deep dynasty leagues. He could really contribute for this offense, even though it probably won't be pretty, but he's going to be on the field and getting work, in my opinion. Man, absolutely wild. We'll break it all down probably on our next podcast episode. I'm sure that will be our lead in. So stay tuned for that. We just dropped this week's podcast where we did a 10-round midseason dynasty startup mock with some guys from the Destination Devi Heisman group. That video just dropped. The podcast just dropped tonight. Make sure you all go check that out. And now I don't think we have anything else. This is absolutely wild right now. Let's go and actually break down this game for what it was. And we can actually get into a good game for the first time where I'm actually excited to talk about a game that was 34-42. Probably more scoring than we've seen in 3 Thursday night football games so far this year combined. Oh, man, we actually saw the scoring. I know some of it was defensive, but we actually get to look into some serious actual snap counts and target shares and yards that actually matter for our fantasy teams. Man, good night to stay awake for your fantasy rosters right now. Just good for football overall. I'm excited. First off, we're going to jump into the New Orleans Saints stat lines. It wasn't a pretty game from Andy Dalton tonight. He went 30 for 47. I mean, honestly, just in terms of completions and attempts, he didn't look bad, but those 3 interceptions were costly. 2 of them ran back for pick sixes. He threw for 361 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, like I just said. Man, even though he threw for those interceptions, if you're not playing in a minus for touchdown interceptions ran back for touchdowns league, he's putting up like 38 points in your league this week. There's a good chance that Andy Dalton, with as bad as that game was from him, could still be the QB1 overall in leagues this week. That's absolutely insane to think about. While he wasn't a great game from Andy Dalton, great game for your fantasy rosters if you were using him as a spot start. With that, let's get into the wide receiver breakdown and position, snaps, shares, and routes run. Leading the team, Chris Olave, the rookie phenom, he was added again. There was a total of 72 offensive snaps ran for the New Orleans Saints this week. Chris Olave was on the field for 55 of them. He had 49 routes run on those 55 snaps, taking it in for 12 targets, 7 receptions, 106 yards. Man, if you put a touchdown on this game, Chris Olave was absolutely nuclear. I just traded for him in a league. I wasn't fully bought in, but I'm starting to believe in the hype a little bit after this game. You know, he's still out there. We'll see what happens whenever guys like Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry come back. But until then, Chris Olave is going to run this offense. And I think things can only get better once Jameis Winston gets back. After him, we saw the second receiver being Marquez Callaway, 52 snaps on the 72 overall, 41 routes run. He turned that into only 2 receptions for 20 yards. Wasn't a great overall fantasy production for Marquez Callaway. He did have that 1 interception that technically falls on Dalton, but he dropped the ball, pushed up the ball, returned for an interception touchdown. So, not a great game for Marquez Callaway, but he was still targeted a good bit in this game. Probably not long-term fantasy relevant, though. On that same note, Traquan Smith was the next man up, 44 snaps, 33 routes run, 6 targets. On those 6 targets, he was able to turn that into 5 receptions for 59 yards. Not a bad game from Traquan Smith. Kevin White, we saw the resurgence from Kevin White. I did not even know that he was still in the league until he was running down the sidelines, tiptoeing down, stayed in bounds. It was a good little run after the catch from Kevin White, but nothing worthy of note for your fantasy rosters for the rest of the year. He was on for 21 snaps, 13 routes run, only the 1 target. The 1 target he did turn into that 64-yard scamper, though. Looked explosive, but probably nothing for the long term. The only other guy, saw it again, first touchdown of the game, Rashid Shaheed. 10 snaps, 8 routes run, 1 target, turned it into his only catch and only touchdown for 53 yards. So if you were bold enough to start Rashid Shaheed, he's probably going to crack your lineup in best ball leagues, and he's probably worthy of being in your starting lineup, even though he definitely should not have been. That was bad process if you did, but if you did, still paid off. Where we did see an absolute resurgence, though, that's it for the wide receiver room. We move into the tight end room, where Juwan Johnson was the lead man for this tight end room with 53 snaps, 41 routes run, 5 targets. He turned those 5 targets into 5 receptions for 32 yards, 2 touchdowns. Monster game from Juwan Johnson. Whenever Taysom Hill he's labeled the tight end, but he's probably not going to be playing much of the tight end role. Adam Troutman is out. Juwan Johnson is the one you want to own, and he's back end, he's mid tight end 2. We can find some games, tight end's desolate. So if you need to throw some Juwan Johnson into some lineups, have him as a deep stash in some best ball lineups, hopefully he hits. he can be a real contributor for your team here if you just need a spot start from Juwan Johnson while Adam Troutman's still out. Behind him was Nick Vannett with 22 snaps and only 4 routes run compared to Juwan Johnson's 41. 0 targets. He's their pure blocking tight end. Taysom Hill, he's listed in the stats as a tight end. I'm not even going to talk about him. I'm just going to talk about him in whatever specialty role you want to talk about. He took a total of 18 snaps on the team's total 72, 9 routes run, only 1 target, and he threw for 2 of 2 in this game, 2 completions, 2 attempts, threw for 48 yards still. That, I mean, it would bump in your fantasy teams. He also had 3 carries for 9 yards, and then he had 1 reception, 3 yards, and the touchdown. Taysom Hill, the real do-it-all guy. I mean, I keep thinking that he's not going to be startable week over week, and he keeps proving me wrong. So I guess I need to make the change until he starts not producing. I guess you need to roll, especially if he can fill in your tight end role, and he should in all formats. He probably shouldn't be, but Taysom Hill is a tight end, top 5 tight end in the league right now in terms of fantasy scoring. Behind him, the only other tight end was J.P. Holtz, ran for 13 snaps, 2 routes run, non-contributor for your fantasy formats. After that, we're going to move into our running back position where we saw Alvin Kamara be the workhorse for this running back crew tonight. Total of 52 snaps on the 72 overall. Ran for 28 routes run. He had 8 targets in this game. He turned the 8 targets into 7 receptions and 56 yards. Great receiving game from one of the best receiving backs in the league, Alvin Kamara. Behind him, the plotter, Mark Ingram, still was on the field for 20 snaps. He even had 13 routes run, took it for 3 targets as well. Mark Ingram in this one took it for 3 receptions and 16 yards. So a nice little contribution if you had a spot start Mark Ingram. And then Dwayne Washington was the only other back. He took 1 snap, not worthy of even mentioning. We'll get into the actual rushing share now. Alvin Kamara leading the room with 11 carries, turned it into 49 yards, no touchdowns on the game. So, it's a good term. It's a good game in overall usage, especially with the receiving work that he put in. Would have been great to get one of those touchdowns, one of the touchdowns from maybe Juwan Johnson or Taysom Hill that they took in. But still an overall good game from Kamara. You're not going to get burned if you started him this week. Andy Dalton was actually the next in carries behind, or in terms of yardage behind him and carries. He ran for 4 times. He ran 4 times for 21 yards, and then Taysom Hill with his 3 carries for 9 yards. Mark Ingram with 4 carries for 6 yards. Nothing that you really are excited about outside of Alvin Kamara. With that, we're going to get into, we don't have the running back usage data from PFF for the New Orleans Saints for this week yet. So we're just going to jump right over into the winning team, the Arizona Cardinals, putting up 42 points this week. Like I said, 14 of it was put up by the defense on those Andy Dalton pick sixes, but still an overall good game from the Arizona Cardinals. We saw Kyler Murray go 20 of 29 in this game, 204 yards, 1 touchdown. Doesn't compare anything to what Andy Dalton just put up this night, but it's because they were down. They had to come back in the game, and Kyler Murray really didn't have to do all that much. So it wasn't a great game from Kyler Murray, but just the game flow and the game scheme kind of dictated that one. So let's get into their wide receiving options for this game. We saw the comeback game for DeAndre Hopkins coming off the 6-game suspension for the PED violation. Came back absolutely roaring. He's an absolute animal on the field. Kind of feel bad. I sold him off right before this game for a second, and man, I wish I didn't do that. Probably could have gotten a little bit more, but I wasn't expecting him to come out like this. DeAndre Hopkins, 60 snaps. Team ran a total of 65 snaps on offense. He took 60 of them, ran 29 routes, took them for 14 targets, 10 receptions, and 103 yards in his return. Man, with not Bateman, but Marquise Brown going out of this game. Get those two confused all the time. With Marquise Brown going out the week before, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the focal point of this offense until he returns, and he's going to be an absolute monster down the stretch for your fantasy teams. Right behind him was Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore, for some reason, taking that fade to the end zone because Kyler and DeAndre couldn't really get matched up on the hot route, it looked like. So 5'7" Rondale Moore running fade routes in the end zone, but he had 58 snaps on the game. Obviously, that fade route didn't work out. He got pushed out of bounds, bobbled the ball. offensive pass interference, everything you don't want. But 58 snaps on the total of 65 for the game. He actually ran one more route than DeAndre Hopkins, 30 routes run in this game. Turned that he had only took 2 targets, though, for 1 reception and 31 yards. Rondale Moore, not a good night from him. D-Hop is that dude. I think he's going to overshadow the rest of this offense, just going to get peppered with targets right now. Greg Dortch was the man up behind Rondale. He was in for 34 snaps, 16 routes run, only had 1 target, though. He had 1 carry, too. I mean, he took that 1 carry for 1 yard and 1 reception for 5 yards. He did score the touchdown, though, the lone receiving touchdown in this game from the Arizona offense. So if you had to, for some reason, be starting Greg Dortch, maybe you thought Marquise being out would open up a little bit for Dortch, and you had nothing else due to injuries. Hopefully you didn't have to do that, but he salvaged that game with maybe a touchdown to score like 8 points instead of a dud for your team. Robbie Anderson, the new guy over from the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers, again, selling off every piece of assets that they have for future draft capital in their full rebuild. He took 12 snaps in this game, turned it into 7 routes run, only 1 target, though. Didn't catch that ball, so a non-factor for your fantasy teams. That's it for the wide receiving room for the Arizona Cardinals. We'll move from there into the tight end room. Zach Ertz is still the man in this offense. 52 of the 65 snaps on the field. He turned that into 28 routes run, 3 targets, turned those 2 targets into 2 receptions and 21 yards. Not a great game from Zach Ertz, but I think this was really dictated more by the lack of necessity for the Arizona Cardinals to be throwing the ball in this game, because they did just get up to such a big lead before the second half. Trey McBride was the guy behind Zach Ertz. He was on for 33 snaps, ran 13 routes. Didn't get targeted in this game, though. Non-factor for your fantasy teams. Maybe he can turn into something a couple years down the line, but he's not going to be anything for the rest of this year. Steven Anderson was the only guy in the tight end room that got snaps. Took it for 6 snaps, 0 routes run, non-factor. From there, we're going to move into the running back room, and this is where your spot starts came in. This is why you hold guys like Eno Benjamin, Keontae Ingram. It's because the running back position is just so fragile. You get these guys to give you 2-3 weeks, and they still produce like they're the lead running back. Eno Benjamin in this game was in for 48 snaps. He had 25 routes run, 5 targets, and he also had the 12 carries on his 5 targets. He took that for, let me find him real quick, 4 receptions and 21 yards, a nice little contribution in the receiving game for Eno Benjamin. On the ground, 12 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Salvaged it a little bit in the second half when Arizona was running the clock out, and a good game from Eno Benjamin if you did have to spot start him, hitting your lineup in all best ball leagues probably by the end of the week. Great pickup if you were able to do that for this week with James Conner out. And really, James Conner might be on the back burner now. We saw really, really good running from Eno Benjamin and Keontae Ingram in this game. Moving into Keontae Ingram, actually from there, we had him with 19 snaps in this game. He ran 9 routes with 2 targets. His 2 targets turned into, can't be right, he had 5 targets in this game. Sorry about that. Eno Benjamin was the one with 5 targets. Sorry, I already talked about him. Keontae Ingram, he did take his 2 targets for 2 receptions and 23 yards. Nice little contribution that he gave you in the receiving game. He also did look good in the running game, though. He was in on the goal line on a couple of times. He only had 3 less carries than Eno Benjamin in this game. Keontae Ingram with 9 carries. Wasn't great in terms of yards per carry, only had 14 yards, but he did get that touchdown where he stretched out over the goal line and went to review. They confirmed it, so a nice little game from Keontae Ingram. You obviously didn't start him anywhere, but if you do have him on some taxi squads or something, might be a good pickup or a hold for the future with Keontae Ingram. Outside of that, the only running back worthy of note was Corey Clement. He had a single snap in this game, non-factor for fantasy teams. We do have the Arizona Cardinals running back usage with PFF data, so we can break it down when they were on the field, all of their plays, early downs, goal line, short yardage, third downs, helps us break down a little bit more of where they are on the field and when they are on the field so that we can use this for our fantasy rosters. In terms of all plays, Eno Benjamin and Keontae Ingram were the only ones who actually recorded anything. Corey Clement, yes, Corey Clement was the only one on the field, and he was in for a 2-back set, so he doesn't actually even get factored in here. In all of the plays, the Arizona Cardinals ran Benjamin out there for 45 of the snaps, Keontae Ingram for 17, and then they had a 2-back set for 3 plays. On the early downs, we saw Benjamin with a large majority of this workload, 29 snaps for Benjamin on early downs, 13 for Keontae Ingram, and two running back sets in the early down formations. On the goal line, Benjamin still with a lot of the work here. He had 6 of the total 9 snaps on the goal line. Benjamin saw 6 of them. Keontae Ingram only saw 2, and they had a 2-back set in one of those packages. In short yardage, they only had 1 short yardage situation in this game. That was Keontae Ingram. And then on third down, Keontae Ingram still got 1 snap, but this, again, still dominated by Benjamin. 10 snaps and third downs for Benjamin. He is the pass catching back for this offense, and he is going to be contributing like this for your team more than likely for every game that James Conner misses. And I will be really interested to see what this running back share is when James Conner comes back, because these two really showed out, and James Conner has been a little bit on the downtrend, it seems like, for this year. Be really interested to see where these snap shares go once James Conner comes back. Man, this was an absolute crazy night. I was glad to break this one down. 42-34, Arizona over New Orleans, an absolutely wild game, a wild night. CMC to San Francisco. We'll be sure to get into that one more throughout the week. Man, great rebound Thursday Night Football from a dead, god-awful series of shows that I have had to do for this recap series for the last couple of games, last couple of weeks. Oh, glad to be back, guys. Hopefully we can do this moving forward. Until then, like and subscribe on this video. Comment if you want to know anything else. I'll be sure to break it down for you. Check out the YouTube feed. The podcast from this week should be everywhere you can find your podcast. Until next time, we'll be back on Monday night for that game. Until then, I'm Cody Smith on the Fantasy Draft Room. This has been a wild night. Thank you all. Cheers.